trying to modernize the systems of the house.
It's like the house was designed to perform the best with somebody going to the local stream and grabbing their water and splitting a bunch of wood all summer long to heat it.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply of the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Fine Homebuilding Editorial Director Andrew Zellner.
Morning, Patrick.
Operations Manager for TDS Custom Construction, Ian Schwant.
Hello, everyone.
And our producer, Jeff Rose.
Howdy.
Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Hey guys, nice to see you this morning.
Good to be here.
Good to be here.
Oh my goodness. Jeff, I'd like you to start off this week. You, well, let's just say you were at what looked like a pretty good party.
Yeah, it was a nice party. It was the celebration of my niece's wedding because the wedding itself was kind of small. So this was everybody who couldn't come to the actual wedding ceremony. So there was 150 people or so, and my brother put together he calls it the draft horse. So he converted a horse trailer into a mobile bar.
And this thing was a disaster, right? He took looked to me like a complete piece of junk and turned it into this amazing thing.
Yeah, I had no idea it was that bad until I saw the pictures. But it came out pretty nice, and I mean it's still a work in progress. But
can you describe? So it's like combines the old horse trailer with like wood frame elements, right?
Right. Yeah. So basically, he replaced the two sides with just framed walls. With a big tilt-up door that becomes kind of a awning and a tilt-out bar, and then he's got a bar inside that can hold up to 3 kegs of beer and taps and all the associated plumbing and refrigerator and.
It's quite the thing. So is this just for this party, or is this an enterprise?
He's planning on making it an enterprise. He lives in a pretty small community. He and his wife were high school teachers for 30 years, so pretty much they know everybody and everybody knows them. And so anytime there's a party, he'll get a call.
That's fantastic. So do you need a CDL to tow around a bar?
I don't. Right now it doesn't even have plates or any kind of.
It's quite the thing. Well, I hope you'll share our admiration for his work. It's a nice thing.
It's pretty inspiring because there's trailers like this all over the area where Andrew and I live.
I'm sure. Yeah.
You could drive around for a day and probably find 3 or 4 of these things in similar condition, ready to buy for a sawing.
Some of my first woodworking projects, fresh out of college, were in the home bar making arena.
It's a good place to start.
Yeah. There's a big payoff at the end. The first one we did. I lived in a house with two other dudes and like had all my tools in the basement. And we designed it so you could fit a kegerator in it and, have some other underspace, but like got like the brass rail and the bar top in particular. We collected enough bottle caps from beer bottles to be able to inlay them in epoxy. And it was like, we ordered like half a gallon of epoxy thinking like that was enough.
You needed more like 10 is my guess.
Yeah, like the bar top itself, not only bottle caps, but epoxy costs, I don't know, $500 or something. But like you get to this point where like you either have to keep going or like start over completely. Yeah.
How did it turn out?
It was great. It stayed in that house where we built it for 3 or 4 years, and then my buddy moved it with him to another house, and then when he realized he wasn't in the large bar home hosting arena of his life anymore, so he sold it to a guy on Craigslist. And then he actually made a keezer, which is where you take a chest freezer and add some electronics to it to control the temperature, so you can use it for storing kegs of beer. And so he got super into home brewing and could store 5 different kinds of beer in 5-gallon kegs in that keezer. And that was like the second iteration of the home bar scenario.
Well, that's, of all the diversity of woodworking and building I've done, then bar is not on the list. I feel rather inadequate with what's going on.
Yeah.
That ship has sailed for you. That's like Andrew said, that's a right out of college, right, early 20s endeavor.
Hey, my brother's retired, so
Yeah, there you go. That's the other way,
it comes
right?
back around.
Comes back around. There's an interesting element of van life in that trailer that he did.
Say that again. Van life?
Van life. People buying the cargo vans that you would normally see a plumber or a carpenter use and turning them into little
RVs
or tiny houses. But there's an element of that in that trailer.
I've been inspired. I'm going to keep it to myself because, it's going to be a big surprise.
Are we going back to the podcast van?
Where we drive around and solve mysteries.
Ian, you sent some amazing photography of one of your projects this morning to me. Can you talk about that, please?
Yeah, this is a triangle-shaped deck that was designed by a local architect for his house on Lake Monona, and it's going to mimic the front or the prow of a ship, and it sits on just a concrete wall instead of piers, so it will give the look that it's somewhat floating in his yard. So the two of our guys were there forming up the concrete wall. We had originally looked at subcontracting it out, but after the third round of value engineering with, I think, the second or third engineer, we came up with something that we were pretty confident we could execute ourselves. So they finished up the wood formwork using 3/4-inch CDX and some wood form ties and just regular 2x4s. Did all the rebar cage work themselves, and they've got it ready to pour tomorrow afternoon.
I have to say, it's really a shame to fill this beautiful formwork with concrete because it is absolutely beautiful, right?
Yeah, and then to tear it down and
throw it away.
Sit in the corner of our shop. Our projects typically aren't big enough to get the attention we need from a concrete contractor. We can get pricing often easy enough, but a lot of times when it comes to scheduling, it's for that 2-3 months maybe, which doesn't work for us. So the more of this little stuff that we can train our people to do, the better. And we have one of our project managers on staff is well versed in the concrete form world.
I gotta think that a normal concrete worker, couldn't do what you guys did. This is somebody who's very skilled in form building, which is, I would argue, a kind of carpentry.
Right, and that's why we chose the wood forms for this one. It just seemed like a much easier way to go. We had teased the idea of board forming it, but we couldn't get our heads around how to do that for this odd shape. And then it's a 12-inch thick wall, so there's quite a bit of weight in that wall and that 4 yards of concrete.
what is the mechanism that holds the two forms together to keep from spreading under the weight of the wet concrete?
So it's a wood form tie. I'll take a picture of it for the podcast page, but it has these two stops on it that stay inside the form. They look like cones, I guess, like cone shaped, and so the flat end of it is what butts up against the inside of the 3/4 inch CDX, and then the 2x4 whalers and the wedges are what pinches the wood form against those form ties.
It's beautiful work. It's a shame it's so disposable because it's craft by any measure.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting to see the guys take to it. At first, when we ran it by them of, hey, we can fast track this job into production 2 months earlier if you're willing to take this on, and for them to be willing to do that was pretty cool to see.
What is the deck going to look like? Is it pretty much all teak like you'd find on a sailboat?
No, it's going to have walls on it instead of railings, and then those walls are going to return back to the house, and it'll just be Trex decking. But there's a lot of pressure-treated LVL work and a pretty large metal connector hanger budget within the project.
Are the joists in tension? The joist end? I mean, because my presumption is that this giant wall of concrete is somewhere near the middle of this deck. So
yeah, so it runs down the middle of the triangle, and then the joists sit on it. But then also the pressure-treated LVLs that form the outside of the triangle also sit on it. So the ledger on the house is pressure-treated LVL bolted to the house, which will then have the sides of the triangle hung off of it. And the point of the triangle will rest on the outer point of a box beam that we have to build on top of this wall.
sounds easy.
Yeah. I've been staring at the job for like over a year on my screen, estimating it and going over stuff with the designer and the engineer to determine how to do it within a budget that was realistic. This third method of engineering that we came up with resulted in, I think it was close to a 50% reduction in the overall cost of the project. So it made a pretty big difference.
Yeah.
The original
Why such
one
a
was like
complicated
a bridge
design? Is it just an aesthetic choice, or is there some
purely aesthetic choice? And then the house overlooks a park which is on the lake shore, so it's a pretty interesting piece of real estate.
Excellent.
And the owner's an architect.
Well, I've been cutting firewood, which I do this despite my better judgment, but I just wanted to share that folks who are considering, a good chainsaw for not everyday use, but regular use, I've had great success with my Husqvarna 445, which is an 18-inch chainsaw. And I bought a larger saw after we had a bunch of downed trees after a big storm. And I've been using that a little too because it's got a 24-inch bar. That's a Husqvarna 460, and I try not to use it because it's stupidly heavy. But when you need to cut big logs, it's the go-to machine.
Is firewood part of your home heating strategy, Patrick?
It has been, Andrew, largely to deal with downed trees in the landscape. And we have a wood stove in the barn. And then when the pandemic hit, I was using it so much more, and it's a cheap way to heat and somewhat enjoyable. Keeps me fit, somewhat.
Do you have a wood splitter, or are you doing this with a maul, or?
That's a good question. So I've borrowed the neighbor's log splitter a couple times. You know what? You can do a lot of splitting in a weekend if you stick to it. More recently, though, I've been using a splitting wedge and an 8-pound sledgehammer just because that's what I have, and it's a little exercise without going crazy. Keeps me active.
There's something very like New England puritanical self-punishment in what you're doing.
Yeah. Oh, as always, we got some great feedback from our listeners. This comes from Marc. Hey guys, I emailed a while back asking to do with my bedroom addition. I live in a ranch, and the back half of my bedroom was a deck/screen porch converted to living space. I insulated the entire space. The house was built in 1952, and there wasn't insulation in many places. The back half of the room has a flat roof that I re-insulated. The ceiling under that part. The room was still super cold in the winter, and I eventually ripped up the floor, partly to investigate, but also because I was putting a new floor down anyway. I only have a foot or less of clearance under the floor joist, and the aluminum siding outside ran below grade to close off the area. I ended up taking up the old subfloor, cutting out and ripping up the decking, and putting R13 foam board insulation between the joists. Everything in the dirt under the deck was dry, and nothing was rotting. Whoever built the addition put blown insulation, the torn-up newspaper kind. I taped the foam board with zip tape and used spray foam for anything else that needed to be plugged. I ripped down some strips of wood to tack in to act as ledgers to hold up the foam. After that, I put in the new subfloor and then some nice pergo planks. It came out great. We'll see how it all holds up. Thanks for everything. Well, thank you. What do you think of Marc's bedroom?
I'm excited to see how it performs.
Yeah. I love the use of zip tape as an air sealing material. That's really
do a
works,
lot
I'm
with
sure.
it.
Yeah. Tony had some thoughts for us. He says, "Hi, FHB podcast crew. In episode 479, Patrick asked, what's it like to be around a bandsaw for hours on end schlepping wood that comes off of it? It just so happens I can speak to that experience. As early on as I can remember, we had a sawmill on our small farm in southern Indiana. The first sawmill was an old bell saw circular sawmill that my dad set up to cut lumber to build a new building that would serve as a workshop, tractor shed, granary, and corn crib. The sawmill was designed to be powered by a flat belt, and Dad started out powering the mill with an old Alice Chalmers WD-45 tractor we had on the farm. He was comfortable with flat belt driven machinery, having helped operate steam engine powered threshing machines as a young man. The old 45 horsepower tractor was underpowered for the task, so he cut the left rear fender off of an old 62 Dodge Dart sedan and rigged it up on blocks to drive the belt off of the left rear tire of the car. I suspect he modified the transaxle as well to ensure full power was delivered to the left rear wheel at all times. He made a throttle control from the sawyer station so the old car could be throttled up to make cuts and throttled down to cycle the log carriage between them. I was probably around 6 to 10 years old at the time and just thought this was normal. Doesn't everybody's dad have a sawmill, rig up cool stuff, and build their own buildings? The old bell saw rig cut all the lumber for the planned building, but was limited in the diameter and length of the logs it could cut. So in 1986, my family purchased one of the new Wood-Mizer LT30 sawmills. The mill did not have the hydraulic log loader features of the mill discussed by Andrew, only a 16 horsepower Kohler engine to power the blade and charge the battery powering the saw carriage and elevation adjustment motors. Everything else was manually operated. In addition to cutting lumber on the farm for furniture making and building maintenance, Dad and my brothers performed custom sawing for others in the area in the summer and on weekends year-round. Eventually, I became old and strong enough to help out with this as well, and so my experience being around a bandsaw for hours on end, schlepping wood that comes off of it, began. Sometimes I'd help Dad with custom sawing, and sometimes it would be my next oldest brother and me. Mornings started early as we pulled the saw to the customer's location, set it up, and got acquainted with our surroundings and the customer. Jobs ranged from days to weeks long. Typically, whoever hired us had a tractor or skid steer loader available to load logs, but on occasion it was just brute force to get the logs up on the loading ramps and onto the saw bed. My fathers and brothers eventually rigged up a winch system to help out in those circumstances. My father and brothers typically operated the saw, and I served as the off-bearer and assistant. I helped load logs, rotate logs into proper position for efficient cutting, clamp them securely, remove dirt and bark as needed to extend the blade's life. We removed slabs and boards as they were cut, helped rotate the can as needed for the next cut, adjusted the saw throat, stickered lumber, etc. There was a rhythm to this work and a process to be followed. And as you and some of your guests have discussed regarding construction crews, we got to the point where we knew what each other needed to do the work without even talking. While it was hard and sometimes boring work, there was also an occasional excitement and fun. A large bandsaw blade breaking in the middle of a cut makes a hell of a pop and will definitely wake you up. Finding occasional treasure inside a tree was fun. The saw would cut right through bullets and nails without much issue. Horseshoes, not so much, and certainly not glass insulators. And we learned that frozen logs didn't cut so well either. Many a cold beer was drunk at the end of a hard day's work, compliments of the customer, and there was frequently the occasion to sample the customer's homemade wine. Don't tell Mom. Even some moonshine was said to be sampled once or twice, although I wasn't there for that. I have realized later in life that this act of working together physically in harmony to achieve a common goal, whether that was sawing lumber or farm work, was the primary form of bonding between my father and brothers and me. I suspect many of your listeners in the trades can relate. These days, when I hear others talk about having lumber cut by a wood miser, as your colleagues on the Shop Talk Live podcast occasionally do, or smell fresh cut oak, pine, or other lumber in the pallet yard at the manufacturing facility where I work now, I grow nostalgic for those simpler days of working with the wood miser. I'm enjoying the podcast, as well as the Pro Talk and Keep Craft Alive podcast. Keep up the great work. Sincerely, Tony. I've attached a picture of my father and oldest brother operating the wood miser and a picture of the house my brother built years ago, sided with oak bevel lap siding cut on the wood miser.
I wish I could see a picture of this Dodge Dart setup.
I can visualize it pretty well.
It's a great story, Tony.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So that Alice Chalmers that he mentions is the same one that we ran our cutoff saw with for cutting firewood. And it's inspired me to talk to my dad about getting that rig fired up if you ever come out to the place.
I'm happy with having all my limbs.
You can just videotape it. I don't think Dad would let anyone other than him or I anywhere near that rig, but I think it should go out for one last fire up after hearing this letter.
What do you think it's like to blow up a bandsaw blade on a glass insulator or whatever? That sounds terrifying.
I'm sure it's loud.
You should be wearing ear protection already, but
sure.
Yeah.
I've seen the aftermath of a bandsaw blade breaking in the fine woodworking shop. The large steel frame bandsaw, and it wrinkles up like an accordion because I guess the blade is then oscillating back and forth and hits the stock, and it looks violent. You ever had this happen, Andrew?
I have broken a bandsaw blade, and it's like startling, but it happens so quickly that like you don't have time to process how startling it is because you're just like, something's not right here, and I got to shut this bandsaw off.
and then you go like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
This comes from Marc. Remodeling mostly solo during the pandemic was hugely challenging but rewarding. Your podcast has kept me company as well as informed during the whole project. If I've learned anything, is that each part of the project will need some time to finesse when there are unexpected issues of fitment. Isn't that always?
He's being very charitable by using the word finesse.
All the landscaping other than the 50-year-old tree was taken down to the dirt. We have 2 new bathrooms, new kitchens, refinishing the original red/white oak flooring, installing 2 rooms with salvage flooring to match, refaced fireplaces, new mantles, and repairing any and all surfaces, swapping out all the outlets and switches to match for the first time ever, and many other things. As attached as the photo my father took in the early 70s before they put the addition on, early in the ownership of this house, my dad met the original architect who said, "I still have those plans at my office. Would you like them?" So in a drawer, there is a full set of the original 1940 prints. This is an interesting house. Who wants to take a stab at describing it?
I'm trying to pull up the picture because it is a very different, I guess, is that a mansard roof?
That's what I would talk about it with dormer
A
windows or
mansard
mansard
roof.
windows. Yeah.
It looks like something you would see in like England or an old European town to me.
It's cool. It looks small, or maybe it's just it looks like it's a little house.
Yeah, definitely. Very, very small and economical.
It's great. And Marc, your renovations look amazing. I think you should be extremely proud of the work.
Love that the double front door
Yeah.
in the original.
What architectural style would you describe this house, Jeff?
Well, I mean, it's definitely a mansard roof, but I think it's almost Beaux-Art, kind of.
What's
It has
Beaux-Art?
the brickwork on the corners that does kind of, it does recall the like Beaux Art stone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You'd call those coins, right? With a Q is the term for that
so,
trim,
yeah.
trim work or stone work on the corner of a building that sets out beyond the face of the siding or stone plane, in this case brick.
I think this, was definitely a fancy house when it was built, but it was by no means big or extravagant. But somebody was shooting for a style.
And it appears to be square, which
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
At least
interesting.
originally.
Yeah.
And then the addition kind of put another rectangle on it. Well, should we get to some questions?
Let's do it.
People still want to ask us questions, yeah.
Yeah. Here, this one's from Bob. The front face of our house, yes, it's out of season. This is the rear of the house with a 2005 addition. The issue is on either side of the beam that opens the kitchen part of the original house to the great room, which is part of the extension. You are seeing it from both angles. This area, expanded below on the leftmost picture, looks like compression at the drywall on the left side of the opening, which made me think something was settling. A structural engineer looked at it but didn't think it was moving enough to be an immediate issue. What we've explored so far is that the structural engineering contractor who did helical piers on the front of the house doesn't believe there's any foundation movement in this area. And after doing some close inspections, I didn't see any foundation cracks or seams in the relevant areas. However, since that time, we recently realized that on the right side of the beam, looking from within the kitchen, we have a similar, larger area of drywall compression. Given that this area is above the light switch, it wasn't noticeable until recently. It seems like we have a more urgent issue now. We also have some cracking along the length of some drywall seams on the left side. The core question here are, what does your gut tell you, and how would you go about getting a clear diagnosis? It feels to me like someone needs to open up the drywall in these areas, confirm what the issue is, and make a plan to remediate. Should I be asking this from a structural engineer, a general contractor? We're trying to get clarity on a plan from someone who doesn't have a conflict of interest. What do you guys think about Bob's situation here?
I think he's on the right track. I think he needs a remodeling contractor that specializes in doing additions and things of that nature and pull that drywall off.
Someone like TDS Custom Construction.
Right, yeah, if he was in Madison, yeah, somebody like us that does additions to old houses. My gut tells me that there's something going on with the way that they put that beam in to open up that, what was the exterior wall of the house, where it's maybe being side loaded in a weird way, or it's slightly undersized. It's going to be almost impossible to know without peeling the drywall off. But from the look of it, he's got cabinets against that wall, which will probably have to come down. Hopefully you don't have to do anything with the sink countertop below it that appears to be some kind of stone. But I think you got to get into that kitchen side of the wall.
We should say that the photos he sent us show bulging drywall, and it's especially bad near a series of light switches that probably control, lights in the ceiling or under cabinet lighting. And it's
Yeah.
bulged out from the wall. Clearly, something is moving around in there.
Yeah, depending on where he is in 2005, this may not have needed to be a permitted job. So it's hard to know if somebody would have followed through with the architect drawings that he sent along and did the correct beam size.
How could a severe structural change, like a huge 8 or 10 foot, 12-foot opening, not be a permitted project? That's crazy to me.
Well, it depends on where it is. If that was in Maine, it probably wouldn't have been a permitted project. And I would assume he shows a picture with snow, so it's likely not down south somewhere where they also don't have a permit structure in some municipalities. But it wouldn't surprise me if this was something backyard addition somebody just did without all the right permits that most cities would make you have now.
I immediately saw the electrical box, which is probably 4 gang, and if there's a big post that was in the way, electricians are known to completely hack through important structural members because I don't know why.
It does appear that it's two stud widths away from the opening, which makes me go with what you're saying, Patrick, because that should have an opening of that size, 2, if not 3 jack studs under that beam with another 2 king studs alongside of it.
It's going to be a huge post. This is a big opening.
Yeah, they're in thinking about it and talking it through, Patrick, there shouldn't even be room right there for that switch box.
Yeah, I'd say start by pulling just that piece of drywall that's already popped off and look in there and see if someone cut through the post that's holding up the end of that beam. And if they did, fix it soon. Anyone else? Go ahead, Andrew.
Patrick, something you said on one of the first podcasts I was on with you was that drywall is cheap, and that's become a refrain whenever somebody asks me a building question, is like, what do you think's going on in there? And I was like, drywall's cheap. Open it up.
It's easy to fix too. Some wall treatments are very difficult to fix. Your hand printed wallpaper jumps to mind, but if you have painted drywall, have at it.
Yeah.
Bob, let us know what's in there. I'm curious. This comes from the Fine Homebuilding forum on finehomebuilding.com. So Colk55 asks, I haven't had any actual calculations done, so I realize it may be difficult to answer. But in general, would a 4-zone mini-split system make sense in a 1946 1,100 square foot home in a pretty cold climate, Western New York, that is humid in the summer due to lake effect? Currently, we only have central heat, and central AC would be nice, not only to effectively cool the upstairs, and it would be easy given the old ductwork. It would be difficult to retrofit given our old ductwork. 1 zone would be for downstairs and 3 would be for the bedrooms upstairs. Each bedroom is rented separately and mostly kept closed. That's my need for individual zones. 1 bedroom is 280 square feet, 1 is 200, and 1 is 120 square feet. The 4th zone would cover downstairs that is very open and around 550 square feet. Attic insulation is sufficient, but the walls are probably have no R value. There are new double glazed windows. Is there even a unit small enough not to oversize such a setup? Do multiple zones ever make sense for such a situation? My main concern is with cooling during humid summer months, but the added benefit of zone heating would be nice too. Perhaps there's a more efficient way, besides individual window AC units, to cool the home that would make more sense than a multi-zone mini-split. Thanks so much for all your expertise. All right, so does it make sense to have a multi-split with 4 tiny heads? Go, Ian.
You can do it. I don't know if it makes much sense. They're all going to be way oversized
Way oversized.
Yeah.
for what you need. If there's an aversion to window units, that's kind of the easiest way to go. I wonder if there's a ducted version that you could put in the attic. Not that we want to advocate putting mechanicals in the attic, but it might be better to just build a foam board dome in your attic and put some kind of a ducted air handler up there. I don't know, this is a tough one. You found a tough one off the forum.
It makes me think of the heating and cooling units you find in hotel rooms.
Yep.
But they even
Packaged
seemed
heat pump, I think, is how the industry describes those.
Yeah,
maybe.
But even those seem oversized for the sizes of these rooms.
Yeah. I think we need some ductwork and some distribution, which means you can't zone them, individual rooms, but maybe you can zone upstairs and downstairs, which seems to make sense to me.
Yeah. Especially if you can find a place in that second floor to put, whether it's a heat pump, air handler type unit in a closet that you would take over, or take over a corner of a room and then run your ductwork into the attic to distribute it.
The smallest ducted mini split I've heard of are 6,000 BTUs, which would probably be good for all of these rooms, or a 9,000 maybe. So it might work, but you need some design help from a pro, because I think 4 different heads with a multi-split is just not going to work. They're just too big.
And it's going to be pretty expensive.
Yeah.
So I would think you've got a shot at getting a design ducted solution for approximately the same price that would be properly sized and meet your needs.
I wanted a chance to talk about multi-splits because heat pumps are going to be more and more mainstream. And I'm going to put an article up that's on GBA that I have referenced a number of times. It's getting the right mini split. Multi-split systems have an Achilles heel, and I'm going to read part of this. When multi-splits, you need to be very careful about sizing the heads proportionately to their loads, says Dana Dorsett, who's a regular contributor on GBA, a smart guy. A half-ton head in a room with a tiny 1,500 BTU design load will overcool the zone even when it's off if the other zones are right-sized for their loads. The multi-split compressors don't modulate continuously with load. Instead of operating in steps based on the size of the zone calling for coolant, there is always a modest amount of extra that gets distributed to the other heads, even if they're off, to avoid returning liquid coolant to the intake side of the compressor. For tiny load rooms, even without the blower running, the coolant is running in the coil, can overcool or overheat in winter, even if it's not running. So it's running when it's not running, is the takeaway I get. I left you guys speechless.
You did.
Do you guys ever use these, Ian?
I mean, outside of the one that I have in my house, which is
multi-head. Don't you have 2 different single zone units, right? Or do you have them? Yeah.
Yeah, so I have the separate heads on the wall. You're talking about 3 heads on one compressor outside.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the system that I have.
Okay.
And we don't typically install them in our additions that we do. We always try and connect to what's there or upgrade what's there. But we do occasionally have to put a single head unit in an addition when it becomes a cheaper option than upgrading an entire furnace and AC for the rest of the house.
Sure.
But Dana's point about modulation is really important. And I didn't realize that even when I have one of the heads off in the basement that the coolant is still running through it. It makes perfect sense once you hear it spelled out that way.
I mean, it's, a compressor is designed to, run all of them potentially. So, there's excess capacity there. It has to do something with it. Andrew, have you been tempted to do a multi-split in your, older home?
I have, and and I do go down the zoned mini split route when I'm doing these things, because I like the idea of cassettes and something relatively unobtrusive, but they're expensive, and figuring out what I need in each. I've got 2 floors, and each one's about 700 square feet, and so it isn't a huge cooling load. It's probably a bigger heating load than anything, and so it's like a combination of the heat pump with maybe a secondary source of heating or something, where it all breaks down in my head.
I just read a piece that'll be in Fine Homebuilding by, oh my God, who's that piece by? He put all new mini splits to heat and cool his house.
Scott McBride.
McBride. Yeah. And put a PV system on the roof to power it all, which seems pretty awesome, especially with the incentives there are to do this kind of work now.
I think we should talk more about those incentives in the after show today.
Okay, I'm presuming you know way more than I do.
There'll be a little bit of conjecture, but there's legislation at play now that the heat pump question is going to be a big one for the foreseeable future.
I want to talk about who's going to do this work, because there's no one to do it now, and when everyone wants one of these things, who the heck's going to do it?
Yeah, I think it'll be a very, very interesting after show today.
Our next question comes from Ruarri. Hello, FHB podcast. I have an 1860-ish Cape style home a few miles from the coast in southern Maine that I've been working on this past year. It's a timber frame house on a stone foundation, and for years there were no gutters, and the garden was piled up to the second course of siding, causing extensive rot to the sill beam and some posts. I installed gutters, brought the grade down about 7 to 8 inches below the top of the foundation, and replaced a lot of the sill beam under an eave wall and rake with build-up pressure-treated 2x8s. However, I discovered that the rake wall still was sitting on nothing more than a layer of stone at what is the new grade. The crawl space immediately behind this is about 1 inch deep and above the exterior grade, although the rest of the crawl space is 4 to 6 feet deep with proper granite blocks. What are some options for rebuilding this part of the foundation? My attitude towards stone is flaunt it if you got it. That side of the house is about 15 feet long, and masons are quoting upwards of $6,000 for a granite wall on a new concrete footer, 12 to 18 inches down. Alternatively, since I'm already going with the new sill beams, I was considering just putting in a couple of piers and filling in between them with stone to create the illusion of a stone foundation. Are either of these approaches even correct, and is it possible to air seal with the infill approach? Maybe a layer of rigid foam behind the stone sealed to the sill. I'm going whole hog on the exterior and will be resheathing the house with zip system, adding continuous insulation, air gap, and siding. Bonus question, with the dirt crawl space, the humidity is being more or less controlled with exhaust fans and lots of air infiltration last winter. The temperature down there is in the 40s. Am I crazy to rely on air sealing to keep the temperature high enough to put a heat pump water heater down there? Thanks for taking any or all of the questions. My goodness, this is quite a situation here, Ruarri. What do you guys think?
I think I don't even know where to start with this one.
Yeah. Can we talk about air sealing a stone crawl space?
I think that's a great place to start, Andrew.
Yeah.
What do you want to say?
I would say it sounds like you should leave the stone alone and focus your air sealing directly under your structure if you can.
On the underside of the joist?
Yeah.
Okay, that's an approach.
But
The way I've seen this done in old houses, and I've seen it done recently on Martha's Vineyard, or that's not true, on Cape Cod, is just plastic, right? That is, taped to the sill, right? The mud sill, or in this case, it's going to be this giant timber, and then you tape the plastic, and then that's your air barrier. You're making a big plastic bag to keep out infiltration.
And that runs all the way down across the floor and then up the other side like a big plastic bowl.
Yeah. So I think that's what weatherization crews do, because it's, I'm sure, the most affordable compared to other options. Is that an adequate answer, do you think?
I think it's a good place to start. He's got a difficult crawl space with, a portion of the house essentially being built sitting on grade, and then the rest of the house having more of a normal crawl space scenario.
I gotta wonder if there's ledge there. I mean, why would the original builders just not put a foundation like they did everywhere else?
That would be the common way around it, right? If you had ledge and you decided you were going to build the house there, you'd just butt up to it and do something else.
Level on top of it with, rocks.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think his masons doing the granite wall on a 18-inch deep footer is some kind of a frost-protected shallow foundation style endeavor?
Yeah, I mean, you can't do that. It's not frost depth. So I don't know what's going on there.
That's the one that I can't get over, unless that's misquoted or miswritten in his letter. I can't get past that. Even the piers would have to go much deeper or be pinned to some kind of ledge.
Is this a whole house raising situation?
I think Ruarri is just trying to fix the structural deficiencies caused by the grade being piled against the house for so long and rotting the posts and the sill.
But it seems like the house was essentially built on grade to begin with.
This part of
area.
it, right? Anyway, yeah. I kind of think it was either meant to be down and dirty, like housing often is, right? You just need something to live in so you don't freeze to death on, Maine in the 19th century. Or they hit ledge or some other thing that they couldn't get through, or water table, whatever.
Yeah, I think he's got to do some more investigating as to why they stopped. Why
start digging, Ruarri.
Yeah, I think the shovel is the first tool, and then see what you need from there.
I got to think. I don't know. The foundation is not deep enough, but 6K seems reasonable to do that kind of work, as this is all going to be hand excavated, and they have to hold up the house while this work is going on. It's not an easy job.
How do you guys feel about putting a heat pump water heater in the crawl space?
I'd forgotten about that. It's got to be air sealed, right? Because you can't put domestic water pipes in a superly cold place. 40 degrees is a little too close to freezing for my comfort level. All it takes is a power outage for a few hours and you have frozen pipes potentially, right?
Yeah.
Do you think this leans into the idea of somebody trying to do too much with a house that can't support it? The heat pump water heater, the resheathing it and zip, and trying to modernize the systems of the house.
It's like the house was designed to perform the best with somebody going to the local stream and grabbing their water and splitting a bunch of wood all summer long to heat it.
Right.
It's something that we struggle with a lot here in our office, is people that want to do deep energy retrofits on houses that just are not the right house to be trying that on for various reasons.
I think air sealing the crawl space is an achievable goal. I think that'll only help with comfort and energy bills, especially, and it gives the house some resilience. I don't really know what to say about the foundation other than we need more information. Ruarri, you're going to have to go out there and dig some holes and figure out what's going on, why the house wasn't put on a real foundation in the very first, place.
I think you're right. There's something down there that stopped them.
What if it was an addition that somebody did on the cheap?
That's another likely possibility.
And it's the theme of today's show, seemingly. I didn't realize it.
Yeah. I mean, that very well could have been a house that was built in the mid 1800s, and then 20 years later they plopped an addition on it, and both look equally old to the modern eye. He's got to get an old house whisperer in there and really figure out what's going on.
Boy, that is a great Pro Talk guest. I think you all would agree. If you know somebody who is skilled at working on old houses and bringing them into their next 100 years of service, I would love to talk to them on Pro Talk. I think that'd be super interesting.
We've
feels
already
like
had
that-
Mason Lord on twice. That could be a third reason to have him on. Could be the old house whisperer. See, then you would have had him on as business owner, touch of trade, and old house whisperer.
It feels like there's got to be a lot of old house whisperers across the Atlantic in Europe. I feel like their houses are a lot older than ours.
They are, but they're built different, right?
Very different.
Yeah.
A lot of mass walls, a lot of big stone and plaster and brick.
There's some timber there, right?
I think so. And like outside of the UK, especially in
Yeah.
Northern Europe, there's a lot of wood frame construction, various types. But when I see pictures of England and Scotland, it looks like it's all masonry,
Yeah.
all of it.
Yeah.
So I had this idea, and it's not a new idea, but you may recall celebrating Fine Homebuilding's 40th anniversary, we had guest hosts interview the respective podcast hosts of their choosing. I would love to have a listener on the Q&A show on the regular podcast and have them help us answer questions. What do you guys think? Is that a good idea?
That's a great idea.
Fantastic idea.
So anyone out there who is interested in being on the podcast, the pay is what you'd expect.
But the payoff is huge.
Yeah, I think it'd be super fun. Who would you guys want to have on the show?
I think it would be interesting to have someone like Ruarri or many of the other DIY non-trade listeners on the show and give us some of that perspective. I think a lot of the projects that we all do are a little bit clouded by our experience with building and our connections to other builders, and that our questions that we run into are much easier for us to get answered by a competent professional than someone who is maybe relying on somebody at the lumber yard or a neighbor that's done work.
Or even a contractor, right? Yeah, Barbara jumps to mind.
Yeah, I was gonna say Barbara. Barbara feels like someone I'd love to talk to.
Agreed. So, putting it out there for all of you. If you're interested, please get in touch. Just the normal podcast email address will work, and we'll be in touch. So, what's the after show about again, Andrew?
We're going to be talking about energy retrofits and diving in a little bit to some of the new legislation that was passed, and then thinking about heat pumps and the folks who are going to be doing this work over the next 10 years.
That sounds cool.
A lot of questions, maybe some
Yeah.
answers. You'll have to listen to the after show to find out.
That was cool. Anything you want to tell us going on this weekend, guys, before we part company? Big projects?
No big projects for me. It's the big in-laws family vacation over the end of August holiday. We all have various wedding anniversaries and birthdays, etc., over that last weekend. So that's where I will be.
And I'll be continuing on with my upstairs flooring excursions. I've gotten... It's amazing how much stuff you need to move in your house when you're actively living in it in order to do any kind of worthwhile work.
It really adds to the scale of the project, doesn't it? It is a much bigger undertaking to be living in a house while you're rebuilding it. Yeah.
Yeah. So hopefully getting to the bottom of some of my humps in the floor upstairs.
You just going to rip into that like our first feedback participant, Marc, wrote in? Are you just going to rip it up and see what's in there?
I think so. The carpet, we've wanted to replace the carpet in that bedroom since we moved in, and so I'll cut it into tiny pieces, and then we'll have to replace it and be able to see what's underneath.
One of my favorite things about Marc's photos was seeing like him living in this space while he was like tearing it completely apart, right? It's like, oh, I've been there. Feel bad for you.
Yeah.
Well, as always, it was a pleasure talking to you guys. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Andrew, Ian, and Jeff for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your questions, comments, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Stay tuned for Heat Pump Talk.